I had a corner office on the 14th floor of a building I helped build from the ground up, a retirement account with more commas than I'd ever dreamed of, and a ranch-style house in Scottsdale worth just over $4 million. At 63, I have a pull-out couch in my son-in-law's spare bedroom and a box of my own clothes in the corner that I haven't fully unpacked because some part of me still can't believe this is where I ended up. Let me back up. My name is Aldous. I spent 31 years running a mid-sized civil engineering firm in Phoenix, Arizona. We built overpasses, drainage systems, a stretch of I-10 expansion that took 6 years and nearly broke my marriage the first time around. I say the first time because there was a second marriage and a second divorce. The second one is the one that took everything. Her name was Cheryl. We met at a charity auction in 2009. She was wearing a green dress and laughing at something the auctioneer said, and I thought, this woman has never had a bad day in her life. I was 52. I should have known better. But grief makes you stupid, and I was still grieving my first wife, who had passed 3 years earlier from ovarian cancer. You don't think clearly when you're still hollowed out like that. You see warmth, and you walk toward it without checking whether it's real. We married in 2011. She moved into the Scottsdale house. My daughter, who was 24 at the time, had mixed feelings, but kept them mostly to herself. My son, who was 21, told me point blank at Thanksgiving that he thought it was too soon. I told him I appreciated his honesty and passed the roles. For 2 years, things were fine, not wonderful, not the kind of marriage I'd had before, where we'd sit on the back porch after dinner and not need to say anything because the quiet was enough, but fine, comfortable. She redecorated the house. She joined a book club. She went to spin class on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I worked. I came home. We had dinner. Then her brother moved in with us. She said it was temporary. He'd lost his job in Nevada, needed a few months to get back on his feet. I said okay because she was my wife, and that's what you do. A few months turned into a year. During that year, I started noticing things, small things at first. A credit card statement with charges I didn't recognize. A withdrawal from our joint account that she said was for a dental procedure she'd mentioned to me once, quickly, and I hadn't thought to follow up on. When I did follow up, the dentist's office had no record of the visit. I hired a private investigator in 2013. I didn't want to. I felt sick doing it. Felt like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. But you reach a point where the alternative, staying blind, feels worse. The investigator came back to me with a folder. I don't need to go into every detail, but what was in that folder ended what remained of my trust in Cheryl completely and permanently. I filed for divorce in October of 2013. What happened next took me 4 years to fully understand, and I'm still not sure I understand all of it. Cheryl had a lawyer, a very good one. I had a lawyer too, but I made the mistake of assuming that the facts were on my side and that facts in a courtroom tend to win. They don't always. What wins is preparation, documentation, and the willingness to spend more than the other person. Cheryl and her brother had apparently been planning this longer than I realized. There were records I couldn't find, arguments I couldn't counter. The investigator's folder helped me, but not enough, because by then certain assets had been moved in ways that made them difficult to reclaim. The house went to Cheryl in the settlement. The retirement account was split. She got the car. She got the furniture. She got the kitchen table my first wife and I had bought at an estate sale in Sedona in 1987, which sounds like a small thing except that it wasn't. That table was where my kids did their homework. That table was where my first wife and I sat when her doctor called and used the word malignant for the first time. That table was mine, and Cheryl knew it was mine, and she took it anyway, and her lawyer called it marital property, and the judge agreed. My daughter came to stay with me for a week when I moved into a rental apartment in Tempe. She brought food, unpacked boxes, cried a little when she thought I wasn't looking. My son called every Sunday. But they had their own lives, their own responsibilities. I told them I was fine. I wasn't fine. I kept working. What else do you do? I went to the office. I reviewed project bids. I signed off on drainage reports. I drove 40 minutes each way through Phoenix traffic in a used Camry that made a rattling sound when I hit 45 miles an hour. I ate a lot of microwave soup. I watched a lot of evening news. I turned 60, then 61, then 62 with the grim efficiency of a man who has stopped expecting much from time. I was not managing my health. I want to be honest about that. I was skipping checkups. I was eating badly. I was sleeping 4 hours some nights and telling myself that was enough. The stress of the divorce, the financial loss, the loneliness. I absorbed all of it and didn't let any of it out. I thought that was strength. I understand now that it was just slow damage. In March, 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I had a meeting scheduled with a county inspector at one of our job sites, a water infrastructure project in Chandler. I drove out early. It was already warm. I stood in the sun going over blueprints with one of my project managers, a good man named Felix, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark I felt something shift behind my eyes. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. Then my left arm started to feel strange, heavy, like it was filling with something. Felix was the one who caught me. I don't remember the fall. I remember the blueprints on the ground, and then I remember the inside of an ambulance, and then I remember a very white ceiling. I was 63 years old. I was alone on a job site in Chandler, Arizona, and I was having a heart attack. The first face I saw clearly at the hospital was a cardiologist named Dr. Emmett. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, calm in the way the doctors who've seen everything get calm. He reviewed my chart. He asked me questions about my medical history, family history of cardiac disease, father's side, mother's side. I answered as best I could. Then he paused. He looked at the chart again, then at me. Then he set the clipboard down on the counter, walked to the door, checked the hallway, and closed it. He came back and stood at the foot of my bed. "When were you adopted?" he said. I stared at him. "I wasn't," I said. "What are you talking about?" He pulled a chair to the side of my bed and sat down. His voice was quiet, careful, like someone explaining something that might break. My blood type, he told me, didn't match what I had listed on my medical history forms I'd filled out based on what my parents had told me. The genetic markers on a panel they'd run, cross-referenced with some family history I'd provided, were raising questions. He wasn't telling me I was adopted. He was telling me the medical picture didn't fully add up, and he thought I deserved to know that before they proceeded with treatment. I lay there in a hospital bed with electrodes on my chest and let that sentence rearrange something inside me. I called my daughter that evening. She drove straight to the hospital, 2 hours from Tucson, where she was living. She sat in the chair by my bed and held my hand while I told her what the doctor had said. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, there's something I've been holding on to for a while, and I think you need to know it." My daughter is not a person who says things dramatically. She's practical, measured, takes after her mother. So when she spoke next, I knew she was not guessing. She told me that 3 years earlier, shortly after my first wife's funeral, she'd been going through some documents in the house, old files. She was looking for the insurance paperwork. In a shoebox at the back of the closet shelf, she'd found a letter, handwritten, in an envelope that had been opened and refolded many times. The letter was addressed to my mother. It was from a lawyer. It referenced a private arrangement made in late 1957. It referenced a birth mother by her first name only, and a family in Phoenix who had agreed to raise the child as their own. There was a dollar amount referenced, a number that, even accounting for inflation, was significant. I was born in 1957. My daughter had not told me because she didn't know how, because my mother was gone, because she thought it might destroy me. She had held that letter for 3 years, alone, trying to decide what it meant and whether I needed to know. She started crying before she finished explaining. I told her she didn't have to apologize. I meant it. In the months that followed my cardiac episode, which required a stent and a very stern conversation from Dr. Emmett about my diet and stress levels, I began looking into what that letter meant. I hired a genealogist who specialized in closed adoptions. I submitted a DNA kit through one of the major ancestry services. The results came back faster than I expected and pointed to a family name I had never heard, Holt. The Holts, it turned out, were a family from Flagstaff, Arizona. Old money, mostly in real estate and timber rights. The patriarch, a man named Gideon Holt, had died in 1978. His wife, Meredith, had died in 1994, but they had 2 other children still living. The older one was a woman named Rosalind, who was 71 and lived in Sedona. The younger one was a man named Cobb, who was 68 and still ran a portion of the family's remaining landholdings outside Flagstaff. They were my half-sister and half-brother. I did not call them immediately. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what I would even say. My daughter offered to reach out first to prepare the ground, and I almost took her up on it. In the end, I wrote a letter instead. Old-fashioned, I know, but I didn't trust my voice on the phone, and I didn't trust email to carry the weight of what I needed to say. Rosalind called me 2 days after I sent it. She said, "And I will never forget this as long as I live. I have been waiting for this call for 40 years. She told me that their mother, Meredith, had confided in her before she died. A brief relationship in 1957 with a man who was not yet Gideon Holt. A pregnancy. A decision made by 2 frightened young people that they believed at the time was the only reasonable option. A lawyer. An arrangement, and then a lifetime of wondering. Meredith had left instructions. If any of her children ever came looking, biological or not, Rosalind was to share certain information with them, including information about the estate. Gideon Holt had accumulated significant assets over his lifetime. Rosalind and Cobb had inherited most of it. But Meredith's personal estate, held separately in a trust, had never been fully distributed. She had left provisions for a 3rd child, should one ever appear. I don't want to make this about money because the money is not the part that keeps me up at night. The part that keeps me up at night is the phone call with Cobb, who is a man of very few words, who listened to the whole story without interrupting and then said, "I've got about 30 years of family dinners to catch you up on. When can you get to Flagstaff?" I drove up to Flagstaff on a Saturday in October, the kind of clear October morning that makes you feel like Arizona was put here specifically to remind you that beauty still exists. Rosalind met me in the driveway of a stone and wood house set back in the pines. She is tall, silver-haired, with my same nose, which is not something I expected to see on a stranger's face, and which made me have to look away for a moment. We sat on her back porch for 4 hours. She showed me photographs. Some of Meredith as a young woman. I don't look like my birth mother, but I have her hands, broad across the knuckle, the same slight bend in the index finger. Rosalind pointed it out, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Cobb arrived in the afternoon, quieter, stockier, a man who communicates mostly through the quality of his handshake and the coffee he presses on you. He shook my hand and held it a beat too long and nodded once, slowly, like something was confirmed. My daughter came with me that day. She sat beside me on the porch, and I watched her watching Rosalind, and I thought, she lost her mother too young, and here is a woman with my nose and my hands, and 40 years of family stories, and we are all going to have to figure out what to do with this together. Now about my son. My son had not been speaking to me regularly since the divorce from Cheryl. Not because he sided with her, he didn't, but because he had taken on the role, somewhere along the way, of managing Cheryl's emotional state after the divorce, which meant managing her access to information about me. I didn't fully understand the dynamic until Cheryl told him, apparently, that I had hidden assets during the proceedings, that I had been less than honest, that the divorce was more complicated than I had let on. None of that was true. But she said it with such conviction and so many times that it began to settle into his thinking the way things do when you hear them from someone who cries when she says them. My son had been distant with me for almost 2 years. He showed up at Christmas. He sent birthday texts. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a careful, managed politeness that was harder to take than outright anger would have been. When I had my heart attack, he drove from Denver in 9 hours without stopping. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room with red eyes and a 3-day beard and said, "I should have called more. I'm sorry." I told him he was here now, and I meant that too. Over the months that followed, as the story of my birth family unfolded and I shared it with both my children, something shifted in my son. I think seeing me at the center of a story that had nothing to do with Cheryl, seeing me as someone with history and mystery and a real past that had been kept from me, allowed him to separate the narrative she had given him from the man he actually knew. He started calling on weekdays, not just Sundays. He drove down to Phoenix for Thanksgiving and helped me cook, the two of us elbow to elbow in my rented apartment kitchen, arguing about whether turkey needs to be brined. Cheryl, for her part, had moved to Scottsdale, my Scottsdale, and then, 18 months after the divorce was finalized, had married someone else. I know this because my son told me carefully, like he was handing me something breakable. I told him it was fine. It was fine. What Cheryl does with her life is no longer my concern, and the day I accepted that completely was the day I started sleeping better. What I think about now at 63 is this: I spent the better part of my adult life building things, overpasses, drainage channels, roads that go somewhere. I was good at it because I understood that the work underneath, the unglamorous, expensive, load-bearing work that nobody sees, is what determines whether the surface holds. I never applied that thinking to myself. I ignored the warning signs in my own body the same way an engineer ignores a stress fracture report because the project is already over budget. I told myself I was fine. I absorbed the losses, the loneliness, the sleepless nights, the grief I never finished grieving for my first wife, and I called it coping. It wasn't coping. It was structural deterioration, and eventually, in a construction yard in Chandler in March, I failed under the load. The heart attack was the worst thing that happened to me. It was also the thing that saved my life. If I hadn't collapsed, I wouldn't have had the blood panel. Dr. Emmett wouldn't have paused over my chart. I wouldn't have found Rosalind and Cobb. I wouldn't have known about Meredith's trust. I wouldn't have had the conversation with my daughter in which she finally told me about the letter she'd been carrying alone for 3 years, and in the telling of which she cried, more than I did because she'd been holding it longer. I am still living in the spare room at my daughter's house, but I am looking for a place in Tucson, something small. A yard where I can grow tomatoes badly and not feel judged about it. Rosalind has invited me to spend Christmas in Sedona, and I said yes. Cobb has been sending me his family's old photographs, a few every week, via actual postal mail, which is the most Cobb thing imaginable and which I have come to look forward to more than I expected. My son is coming down from Denver in November. He's bringing his girlfriend, who I haven't met yet, and my daughter is making the thing she makes with cornbread and green chills that is technically a casserole but aspires to be more. We are going to sit around a table that is not the Sedona table. That is not mine yet. That is just a table in a rented house, and we are going to eat together. I used to think that the worst thing a person could do to you was take your house, your savings, your children's respect, the things you built, and the table you sat at. I know now that you can lose all of those things and still be standing. Still be, against all reasonable expectation, someone that other people make room for. You never know when the collapse is the beginning. I spent a lot of years believing that if I just kept my head down and kept building, nothing could fall apart on me. That was the deal I had made with myself somewhere along the way. Work hard enough, stay honest enough, and the structure holds. Cheryl proved me wrong. The divorce proved me wrong. The divorce proved me wrong. And then my own heart, failing at 63 on a job site in Chandler, proved me wrong in the most final way a body can. What I've come to understand is that consequences are not random. They accumulate. Every choice I made to ignore a warning sign, in my health, in my marriage, in the way I swallowed grief instead of working through it, those choices stacked up quietly until they couldn't be ignored anymore. And the same was true on the other side. The way Cheryl operated, the deception, the manipulation of my son, the deliberate cruelty of taking things she knew meant something to me. That didn't go nowhere either. It just moved through time differently than I expected. I used to think justice was supposed to be fast, obvious. I wanted it to arrive like a verdict. What I got instead was slower and stranger and, in the end, more complete. I got Rosalind's phone call. I got Cobb's handshake. I got my son standing in a hospital doorway with red eyes after a 9-hour drive. None of that happened because I won. It happened because I stayed upright long enough for things to find their way back. There's something I want to say about honesty, because I think it's the thing I underestimated most. Not honesty with other people. I was always reasonably straight with other people. I mean honesty with myself. I was not honest with myself about how much the loss of my first wife had never fully healed. I was not honest with myself about what I was actually walking into with Cheryl. I was not honest about the toll the years were taking on my body. That kind of self-deception is quiet and it feels like strength while it's happening. It's not strength. It's a load-bearing wall with a crack in it that you've painted over and chosen not to inspect. My daughter carried a letter for 3 years because she didn't know how to protect me from it and protect herself at the same time. That took a kind of strength I don't think I fully appreciated until I watched her tell me about it in a hospital room, hands shaking. Real strength is not the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway. Driving to Tucson, mailing a letter to strangers in Flagstaff, sitting on a porch with a woman you've never met who has your nose and your hands and 40 years of history you were never given access to. I am not the same man I was before the heart attack. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean it practically. I eat differently. I sleep more. I have learned, slowly and imperfectly, to say when something is hard instead of just absorbing it. And I have learned that the people who are worth keeping in your life are the ones who show up when the structure fails, not the ones who were there when everything was holding. Cobb sends me photographs every week through the mail without any explanation attached. That's enough. That's more than enough. Some things don't need words to carry their weight.